Hi everyone, it's day 29 of our Lent blog series on Walter Brueggemann's reflections for this time. Today's one he calls Like Eagles Renewed, and it's based around Isaiah chapter 40 verse 31, which says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." This is a short but quite impactful passage that really instructs us to wait on the Lord, on the coming of his kingdom to earth. And this hope in faith, and indeed faith in hope, will see our shackles released to enable us to soar like eagles, metaphorically speaking. Walter Brueggemann, for his part, says that in our waiting we must not be distracted by false gods who wield false promises. And as he says, here is the good news. The good news is that we need not serve the wrong God, trust the wrong life giver, fear the wrong power usage. We may read life differently. We're allowed to do that in God's will. And the way to do that is to wait in eager longing for God of creation to rescue and work a new way in the world. To wait in keen expectation, to wait with active zeal, receiving every hint of new life and acting upon it, to be ready to go for the gift of life, as Brueggemann calls it, to leave off fear, intimidation, resignation to our fate, and weariness, to guard against complacency and be ready for the coming of the heavenly kingdom to earth. Isaiah 40:31 contains a great promise of strength for those who are weary and tired, and that's all of us at one time or another. It says, "They who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength, mount up on wings like eagles, run and not be weary, walk and not faint." And this reading promises a sort of supernaturally renewed strength, a strength that would compare to mounting up as an eagle to fly, or running without weariness. The Israelites who first received this promise were worn out from their hard life. They'd lived in exile in Babylon for several decades. Their perspective was darkened by thoughts of despair and fear. "My way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God," it says earlier in Isaiah chapter 40 verse 27. They thought God either couldn't help or didn't care. But Isaiah uses a pair of words, faint and weary, fairly negative words, but 3 times in the span of a few verses here, between verses 27 and 31. Israel was exhausted and burdened from the circumstances of life, weak in body and weak in spirit. How could they endure the hard circumstances of that life for much longer? One thinks of course, modern situations like that of Ukraine, people being virtually blown back to the Stone Age, battered in their own borders, but somehow clinging to hope that their country will remain independent and rise again, almost like an eagle in all its glory. Isaiah responded to these questions with his own questions. "Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not grow faint or grow weary," in verse 28. And this is a good word for the weary. You may grow faint, but God doesn't. God is our endless source of strength and power, and he gives it generously. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might increases strength, in verse 29. So it all sort of links and follows together in Isaiah. This is who God is, the ever-strong and never-weary one, who loves to help weak and weary people. If we think that God is too great to be concerned about our little lives, we actually don't believe he's great enough. God's greatness is not just power and strength, but he is strong for people, for us. God's glory is not just that he has power, but he loves to use that power to help those who are powerless. He uses his virtues and power for the benefit of others, as he did in his earthly ministry when he came in human form as Jesus Christ, the long-awaited Messiah. God is not too great to care. He's too great not to care. In all our weariness and burdens, then, how do we get this strength ourselves? We may expect Isaiah to share the wisdom of physical rest, exercise, diet, and so forth. But while all these are God-given sources of strength, they cannot give us the deepest strength we need when we come to the end of ourselves, of our own limitations. Isaiah himself acknowledges this in chapter 40 verse 30. "Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted." In other words, even those in the apparent prime of life with perfect health have their limits. But there is a greater strength to be had and to be exercised. We need a stronger strength to match our deep discouragements, our times of woe and distress. So how do we get it? Well, of course, there's only one answer. And here we come to the great promise from Isaiah. "They who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength." Not those who work for the Lord, but those who wait for him. This isn't about doing our part and asking God to fill in the blanks and do the rest. It's about faith in God and the grace of patient waiting. This isn't about showing God how strong we are and asking him to give us that little bit more. No, here we admit that we don't have the strength we need at all. We acknowledge that we need the strength that only he gives. And we wait for him, which is more than just passing time. In the midst of our hardship, we look to him as the one who works all things together for the common good. As Christians then, we look to Jesus, who came to us and said in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all who labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Jesus' pledge is not to give us anything onerous, to rest easy in his yoke, and to give us the burden free of his rest. He carried the burden of our sin and judgment upon himself on the cross. He rose again and sent his Spirit to empower and strengthen us in all our weaknesses. He took those earthly weaknesses we all have to the cross on his shoulders. And now, as Easter approaches, we look to him and wait for him to work, ultimately looking for that day when Jesus returns to set all things right and make all things anew. And I'd like to end today with the prayer that Walter Brueggemann uses in his reflection for today, which we must listen to God, listen to adopt his ways, and inherit our reward for our faith, hope, and love. Brueggemann says, "Teach us, O God, to wait in eager